we can make our workflow even easier by capturing the data in the same orientation using Hammer Mission's roof inspection mode. And that allows you to be able to very easily cross-check the data in both visual and thermal side of things. Yeah, it seems like there are two images taken in visual, so this image over here should match up with the thermal side of things, and yeah, in fact it does. Hi, this is Varun from Hammer Missions, and in this video I want to walk you through how to capture a commercial or residential roof using a drone for both a visual and thermal survey, and compare the visual and thermal survey in your results. So let's jump straight in. Right, so hopefully you can see my screen, and what we will be doing in this particular video is we'll be going over how to capture this particular residential roof in thermal and visual data and model that using drones. So specifically we'll be looking at the Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced and the Mavic 3T drones, and we will be looking at how you can take all of their images and use that to create a map of the roof, and use that as a basis for measurements, as a basis for inspection, and create deliverables for your end customers. Right, so the first things first, we want to be able to plan this inspection. So to do that, we need to understand what the parameters of the flights are going to be, and how a drone is going to actually fly and capture the data for this roof. So to do that, I'm going to be using Hammer Missions as a demo platform over here. So first things first, I will essentially go into Hammer Missions and I will create a mission file. So I've got a mission file over here, and I will essentially go into the mission file, tap in my coordinates for where the roof exists, and center my map onto the actual roof. And once I've got my map centered, I'm going to essentially go into the missions menu and start looking at planning the mission. So for this particular mission, we're going to be looking at creating a 2D map and a 3D model, but mostly a 2D map. But in case we want to do a 3D model, it's always good to have extra data, and therefore I'm going to choose the 3D modeling mission. So to do that, I simply go in and choose 3D modeling mission, and then I essentially draw a polygon over the roof that I want to capture. So I'm going to follow the geometry of the roof, that's really important, and create my polygon by marking the different vertices of that polygon. Once I'm done, I'm going to hit OK, and what Hammer's going to do is that it's going to generate a default flight plan for me. Now, it seems like that this particular polygon is really small because it's quite a small roof that we're going to be capturing here, and therefore the flight plan isn't very dense. So what I can do is I go into my mission settings and I start setting up this mission. So let's say we're going to set this up with a Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced. So we can essentially choose that camera from the list of cameras available. And I see that the flight plan has become even more sparse, and that's because of the camera parameters that are now being taken into account to create this mission. So what I will do next is to essentially go ahead and change the altitude for this mission. So 50 meters seems to be quite high for this particular roof. I think I'm probably going to fly at 30 meters, and that's going to give me another flight plan. What I also want to adjust is the ground offset. So ground offset essentially is the height of the site or the structure. So because this is a commercial, this is a residential roof, we think that that's somewhere between 15 to 20 meters. So let me just input 15, and that should give me a better flight plan. For the sake of demo, I think that this roof is probably at 25 and an offset's roughly 15. So I want to be roughly 10 meters above the roof. I could be a bit further away if I wanted to, but that's giving me a nice evenly distributed flight plan. So I'm going to go ahead with that. Right, 80% overlap. I think that is good, given that we might be creating a 3D model, but even if we're just creating a 2D map, having at least 70% or more overlap is a good idea. Flight direction, so since this is a double grid, we want to fly in the direction of the largest edge of the polygon, but since This is very much spherical polygon. It doesn't really matter which direction we fly in. It also is a very small polygon, so optimizing too much for flight direction might be an overkill in this case. Right, okay. Gimbal tilt. So obviously we want to be looking straight down, so that's minus 90 degrees. And flight speed is automatically calculated for us based on the parameters we have inputs. If you wanted, we could fly faster, but it's not really recommended given this camera. And so we're going to go back to our optimal flight speed, which is 1 meter per second. Reverse flight path. So I can see that my start pointer is pointing towards this end of the polygon, which seems to be quite close to this tree on the map. Now I know that I'm probably going to be taller or higher than this tree, but just for the sake of safety, I'm going to move the initial start point over here, because that probably gives me a better starting point, depending on where I take off from to fly this mission. Right, I'm going to change the corners so that there are smooth corners in this flight, and what that will do is that it will allow me to ensure that I am not wasting time on turns for the drone, so that it can essentially turn smoothly and capture high quality data. And last but not the least, I would turn on the show planned images option, because that allows me to see where the images will be taken, and that gives me a good idea with respect to the structure of the images and the overlap between those images. I can see there's going to be roughly 55 pictures or 55 images captured. One battery. It's going to be a relatively quick flight, something like 3 to 4 minutes. And yeah, the distance is really small as well. So it's going to be a really quick flight, but now I have my flight plan, and I know that my flight plan is saved in Hammer Hub. So if I go back to that flight plan, I know that it's saved with all the parameters, and I can be assured that I can bring that up again if I need to, and I also repeat the flight if I need to. Since this is going to be captured using a Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced, we're going to have the same flight plan used for visual and thermal survey. We know that the drone has the capability to be able to take visual and thermal images both at the same time. So we're actually going to leverage that in this particular mission. And we are going to essentially use that to be able to give us our visual and thermal map. Right, okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to essentially bring in my bring in the mobile apps. So that's those mobile apps allow me to essentially transfer the mission, which will then be flown automatically with the drone. So just to give you an idea, we can essentially send this flight plan to our mobile app. So we can send it to our iOS app, or we can send it to our Android app or the Smart Controller app. And the rest of the workflow will be very much on the field. So we're going to look at that in the field. Right, so now we are on site, and as you can see, we've got that particular roof to capture and to do a visual and a thermal survey using our Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced. The conditions are relatively okay, so we should be able to do the flight. And as you can see, we've got Hammer missions loaded up on our Smart Enterprise Controller, and that's the flight plan we'll be flying today with this drone. Right, so let's get started, and we'll see you back at the office. So we're now back from the field, and our mission went well, and we were able to capture all of the data that we wanted. So what I've done is I've brought all the data back into Hammer Hub, so I can upload all of these images. And as you can see over here, the thumbnails represent basically all of the images that were taken by the drone. So I can see the roof clearly in all of these images, and I can bring up any of the images to have a better idea of what the roof looks like. I can just very much cherry pick any of the images. I can select the images by clicking on the thumbnails, but I can also select the images by clicking on the roof itself on the minimap, and that brings up all of the images that were captured in this particular mission, and I can see great amount of detail on this roof. So what we're going to do next is, since we've got all the images, we're going to process these images into a 2D map. So I'm going to hit process, and that should generate a 2D map for us. So I'm going to select 2D map. I'm going to hit process. And similarly, we're going to do the same process, but for the thermal data. So for the thermal images, we're going to upload all of them and we're going to hit process, but we're going to do that in a separate project. So going back to our list of projects, we are actually going to have a visual project and a thermal project. And for the sake of this video, to save some time, I have pre-processed some of these images into a map. So we're going to first go into our visual map. So here's our visual map processed in Hammer, and you can already see the difference with respect to the 2D map produced by Hammer and the Google map. So the image looks very different because it's obviously more updated. And what we can now do is we can essentially click on any of the images and bring up the relevant image in Hammer, and we can go in and annotate the images for any issue. So for example, if we find that there are issues with the tiles, if there are any tiles that are suffering from cracks, or if there's any form of issue that we identify on this roof, we can essentially go in and mark those as a developing issue, or whatever comment we want to call it, and that annotation will then get saved in the image on the platform. So we can always come back to that annotation, and we can create many more annotations like that, either in the same image or also in other images. We can also look at the data from the map point of view. So we've got the map over here, and if we spot anything on the map that doesn't look right, we can mention that in our survey. The other thing we can do is that we can actually measure the dimensions of this roof. So we can essentially go into our measurement tool over here, and we can essentially click on the measurement tool. And what that allows me to do is to essentially drop points on the roof. And once I do that, it's going to give me dimensions for this particular roof. So if I hit enter, I should be able to get dimensions for this roof. So those are the dimensions, and I can do some fine adjustments if required. And it seems like there's about it's about 8 meters in width, and it's also 4 meters in width over here. And I can add more measurements as I like. I can also change the properties so that the measurements are in feet as opposed to meters. If you're watching this in the States or anywhere else where feet is preferred, you can always adjust the measurements so that they are in feet. So that allows you to do measurements on the roof. You can also copy these measurements really easily by just clicking on the measurement, and then that gets copied to the clipboard. And at the same time, you can sort of look at the data from an inspection point of view and mention any issues that might exist in the project. Once you've annotated all the images, you can filter the images by simply clicking on the Annotated Images button, and then that should bring up essentially all of the annotated images in this particular project. So we can very quickly cycle through them. So all of these images, we have found a particular issue, and we can essentially cycle through that and very easily get to those images and get to the tags that have been added to those images. We can also mark some of these images as severe. So we can sort of click on the mark as severe button, and then that essentially changes the severity to red from orange, which means this is the highest level of severity. Obviously, some issues you need to act on very quickly, and others are okay for the meantime. So I think to be able to illustrate that, you can very much look at different severity levels. And also, if you wanted to have a quick overview with respect to where all the issues are, where the problem areas are, you can bring up all of those images, and you can essentially click on any of these images to bring up the relevant image from the map itself. And that's sometimes a very easy way for you to be able to essentially look at all of the data from the map and then bring up all of the issues. So that's how you would do the visual inspection side of things. Let's now move on to the thermal inspection side of things. So in this particular project, we have all of the inspections categorized in the timeline. So I can click on the roof thermal side of things to load up the thermal project. And as you see, we've got a very similar workflow, but now in the thermal domain. We've got this roof that we captured using our Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced. And what we can do is we can, very similar to the visual inspection workflow, we can bring up each of these images and we can have a look at them separately. So in this particular project, we used the Iron Bow color palettes, but you can choose other palettes if you wish to. We do know that Hammer Missions tends to work better with the Iron Bow palettes, and what we want to do over here is to look at which of these colors are brighter. Brighter colors indicate higher levels of heat signature. So hotter objects essentially are brighter, and then cooler objects are obviously darker. So we can tell that the roof is quite hot, which makes sense because this was done during a time of the day when there was quite a lot of heat absorbed by the roof. So essentially, we can look at the roof from this point of view. Once again, if we find any issues, if we see any installation issues, we can essentially go in and sort of mark those issues, and they will be stored in the image in the platform itself. So Hammer Missions also allows us to filter all of these images again, so you can very much go in and look at all of the data from different points of view and create your annotations with respect to any issues you might find. And you can also sometimes spot anomalies by looking at minute details in the issue. So, right, so you have very much a similar workflow over here with respect to looking at the thermal data. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at the thermal and inspection data left and right with respect to each other and compare the differences between them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this compare button over here in Hammer Missions. And once I've clicked the compare button, I can select the visual survey, and then I can select the thermal survey. And what that's going to do is that it's going to bring up the visual survey on the left, and it's going to bring up the thermal survey on the right. So let's have a look. I'm going to click on the launch button over here, and then I'm going to let Hammer Missions essentially bring up the two surveys that we've done. And as you can see, we've got the same roof, one captured in visual and the other one captured in thermal. And we've got them all both loaded up in Hammer Missions. And what we can do is we can essentially, in the visual side of things, we can do measurements if that was required as a part of the survey, in case there is something to be installed on the roof and it's important for you to be able to understand its measurements. And you can also bring up all of the images, the image map for both the visual and the thermal survey. So on my left, you can see the visual survey, and on my right, you can see the thermal survey. And we can once again bring up the images. So if I wanted to look at the image on this part of the roof, on this section of the roof, I can essentially click on that, and then that takes me to the image and takes me to the annotated issue. And if I wanted to look at the same part of the roof, but in the thermal side of things, then we can essentially click on the same part of the roof, but in thermal. So it seems like this particular part over here is actually this part over here. If we wanted, we could make our workflow even easier by capturing the data in the same orientation using Hammer Missions roof inspection mode. And that allows you to be able to very easily cross-check the data in both visual and thermal side of things. Yeah, it seems like there are two images taken in visual, so this image over here should match up with the thermal side of things, and yeah, in fact it does. So we can see on the visual we have all the details, and we can zoom in and really see if there's any issues going on with the roof, and we can see the thermal on this side. A lot of the times what we see is that you have your thermal survey or the thermal data, which gives you an early indicator where there's something wrong with the roof. And what happens then is people want to go to the visual side of things to cross-verify what it could be, and to really understand if there is a particular type of structure on the roof that might be causing issues. Sometimes you have water ingress issues. Other times you have other types of thermal issues which surface maybe not so close to the source. So it's always good to have an idea for what the visual of the property looks like alongside the thermal. And once again, if you did find something, you can annotate the data. So you can bring up and you can mark the data as an issue over here, and you can mark it as an issue over there as well. So that just allows you to have a very quick workflow with respect to seeing both the thermal and the visual side of things for a residential roof. But of course, this process can be repeated for a warehouse, for a commercial roof, for any industrial structure. The workflow is very much the same. It's just that the target side of structure might be different. So this particular video hopefully gives you an understanding for how you can use Hammer Missions to conduct a thermal and visual survey, thermal and visual inspection of a roof using the Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced. You can also use other drone platforms which are compatible with Hammer Missions. And once you've got all of the data stored in Hammer Missions, we've made it really easy for you to be able to share that data with third parties and other stakeholders. So you can very much just go into the platform and click on the share button, which should bring up a share box, and you can essentially share the data with your team members, third parties such as your clients, or stakeholders such as surveyors. And it's just very easy for you to be able to share that data, because you can just go in and you can add an email address. So you can just essentially go in and say user@email.com, and you can invite them to the project so that they can also create their own annotations. And because it's all stored in the cloud, you've only got one copy of the project that everyone can collaborate on. So you don't have to create many different duplicates of the data. And finally, you can also create a report and export all of the images into a PDF format, so that in case someone does not have access to the platform, you can still share all of your findings, all of the issues on this roof, and all of your recommendations in one place, and deliver high quality data professionally and also in a way that can be repeated for efficiency. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully this video gave you an insight into how you can use Hammer Missions for creating your visual and thermal drone roof inspection workflows. If you've got any questions for us, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. We're always looking for a conversation with our customers and our partners. So feel free to let us know how this workflow works with your current workflows, and what could be potentially changed to make the workflow even better. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you in the next end-to-end videos with Hammer Missions. Thank you.